Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, Andy Burnham has announced his final cabinet picks, along with a raft of policies aimed at easing the cost of living crisis. As a hosepipe ban comes into force for millions of Brits, we discuss the case for bringing water back into public ownership. And Donald Trump hits Canada with 50% tariffs on most goods. So much for love, as we saw boldly written at the end of the World Cup. I'm Bastani, and I'm joined tonight by one Michael Walker. Michael, how are you?
Very well. It's cooler outside. It's still stuffy inside. You think it's perfect. I still think it's not quite the ideal temperature for sharp thinking, but we differ on many things.
I think it was quite clement before, but now the lights are on. These are very energy efficient lights, but I do feel that little bit warmer. I have to say, what I don't like about this time of year, Michael, when, the temperatures aren't necessarily as hot as they were, and thank goodness for that, by the way, people still have the aircon on full blast. So now I go onto trains or I go into cafes and I'm actually cold. I'm thinking I need to wear a jacket, which is
that's
even
the American
crazier.
way. I love it. It means you can think. Also, you get a nice difference. I go outside, it's warm. I go inside, it's cool.
But it's too cold.
I like a varied experience throughout the day.
Do you know what has the best aircon in the UK?
The Overground, the Elizabeth line.
I was going to say the British Library. Maybe you know something that I don't. If you'd like to support our work here at Novara Media and contribute to these kinds of important conversations like the air conditioning in Britain right now in 2026, you can, of course, sign up at novaramedia.com/support. We talk about other things as well, like inequality, the climate crisis, the collapse of the high streets. You can, of course, also listen to this show on Spotify and iTunes. And don't forget to let us know what you think in the comments below. The last few days have been a whirlwind for Andy Burnham, the Labour Party, and indeed the country. Last Friday, the Makefield MP replaced Keir Starmer as the leader of the Labour Party. And yesterday, Starmer resigned as Prime Minister before Burnham visited Buckingham Palace and was declared his successor. Burnham immediately went to number 10 Downing Street, giving a speech outside the press before getting on with the work of government. His first job, deciding on a cabinet to oversee the various departments that administer everything from the armed forces to education, healthcare, and housing. Now, we covered a lot of all of that on yesterday's show, with John Healey surprising many after becoming Chancellor, Shabana Mahmood staying at the Home Office, Ed Miliband moving to Home Secretary, and Louise Haigh brought back in from the cold to administer large parts of the state. She's now the Deputy Prime Minister. But after that show, more shifts were announced. Wes Streeting is still there. He's been moved to Defence Secretary. And Bridget Phillipson has been demoted, losing the education brief to Starmer ally Lucy Powell, but keeping the Women and Equalities portfolio. Elsewhere, Miatta Fahnbulleh replaces Miliband as the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. And that new cabinet met for the first time this afternoon, with Burnham emphasising the cost of living as their priority before getting down to business. According to the Guardian newspaper, the new Prime Minister said this: "What can we do just to take that little bit of pressure off people's shoulders? Just to give them that little extra sense that help is coming so that they can have that bit of hope that things are getting better. And that's the mission that we've got to set ourselves together." As a result, Burnham subsequently asked his colleagues to look into what their various departments could do to ease cost of living pressures, both big and small. He said, quote, "We need to be a cost of living government, getting that cost of living down, looking at all possible ways of doing that." And alongside words, we've already seen action too, with the government announcing the abolition of VAT on household electricity bills from October. That reduction from 5% to 0 will come into effect from the first of the month, saving a typical household about £45 a year, according to the government. Ministers say it will be funded by savings from the cancellation of the digital ID programme, which was going to cost £1.8 billion over the next 3 years, with £850 million of that being from this financial year. Getting rid of something that's unpopular in order to help people. Who knows? It might even catch on. But wait one moment, because Darren Jones, loyal Starmerista, and given the boot by Burnham yesterday, had this to say on X. Good news that VAT will be cut on electricity bills. It's a simple way for families to save a few quid and to mechanically help to keep inflation that little bit lower. But the digital ID programme was unfunded. The government will have to set out how it will pay for its new policies at the budget. And on the Today programme, Nick Robinson challenged Labour's Jonathan Reynolds on precisely that point.
The man who was Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has just tweeted welcoming this news, but then pointing out that the way in which you're saying you'll fund it was itself unfunded. He's just tweeted, the government will have to set out how it'll pay for its new policies at the budget.
Well, so the allocation for digital ID was 1.8 billion over 3 years. That is scored by the OBR, so it's in the scorecard. It's a pressure that is within the system that is being removed in order to make this decision on reducing energy bills for people. So it's a straightforward release of one pressure in order to have this decision made. It's a
But the
decision
original
made in the
policy
usual way.
itself was not paid for. Digital ID cards. I quote the OBR, you've just quoted them, the Office for Budget Responsibility, who add up the figures for government. Quotes, no specific savings have yet been identified to pay for digital ID cards, which presumably means no specific savings have been found to pay for this tax cut.
Well, they would have had to have been found. They are part of the scorecard. They are part of the government's pressure. It is a legitimate decision to remove that pressure and instead use the allocation of resources. It's actually less than that 1.8 billion. It's 850 million pounds for the rest of the financial year. It's a straightforward switch spend. I think it is the right decision to make. And again, I think one that will be welcomed by the British people.
Michael, they're already fighting. How do you think Darren Jones's comments will go down, not just with the cabinet and the Prime Minister, but with the public at large?
Well, I'm not sure the public at large are that interested in what Darren Jones is tweeting. I think it's probably the end of his career for a while. I mean, Andy Burnham is the brand new Prime Minister, and within 24 hours, you're sending like catty tweets like that. And also, I mean, it doesn't look that good. He was the guy in charge of spending money. He was like, actually, we hadn't found any money to do that. You idiot. It's like, that doesn't make you look great.
Yeah.
Like, actually, we hadn't done the maths, which means you haven't done the maths. It's bizarre.
It's on the credit card. Joke's on you.
Exactly. I mean, as far as I can tell, sort of what they'd said with this digital ID is they'd said, we need a few departments to try and cut their spending somehow, and then we'll pay for this. And what now Burnham's government can say is, well, they still have to make those savings, and we're going to spend it on VAT cuts instead. So yeah, I think it's ridiculous. I was surprised when I saw that because I know they're going to be bitching about this government in private, but to do it so early on does make you look really childish. And this is someone who thought he had a very impressive career ahead of him, right? There was a moment when he thought he could be the next Prime Minister, and now he just looks completely pathetic.
And what's he doing? I mean, there's two aspects to that question as well, right? Firstly, Darren Jones is a Bristol MP. I think he's Bristol North.
One of the Bristols, I don't know.
He's one of the Bristols. There's 4 Bristol seats, and he's one of them. And right now, he'd be losing that seat, okay, given Labour's national polling. He needs Burnham to do pretty well if he wants to be an MP after the next general elections. There's that level, right? People like Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer's not staying around, him, Bridget Phillips, and all of them fundamentally. They all need this new project, Labour's last roll of the dice, to do well if they want to keep their jobs. So there's that element. But also, just to come out and say it so immediately, there's no grace. I mean, yesterday he did a tweet with a pint saying, that's me for the summer, I'm out, see you in September or something. And he literally can't help himself. Within 24 hours, he's trying to re-inject himself back into the national political conversation. And yes, on the one hand, it's kind of not funded, as he's admitting, nor was his favoured proposal of ID cards. But ultimately, the OBR has it in the scorecard. This isn't...
Well, it was a commitment, right?
Yeah, the government aren't playing fast and loose with the numbers.
So there was money they were going to have to find, and now they no longer have to find the money. So that makes sense, right? The fact that they hadn't worked out precisely where it's going to come from. I mean, it's the same as the defence budget, right? I mean, that was even worse. So Keir Starmer decided, there's this pressure on me to find some more money for defence. I want to, before I leave Parliament, say I was the Prime Minister that gave X amount of money to defence. And then on the scorecard, he just said, 4 billion will be found at the next budget, knowing that by that point, Burnham would be in charge. So it's a bit of a scorched strategy for people without a politics or a project. Like, why they're angry because our own personal advancement has come to a halt. But what do they believe in? What do they stand for? They're just a bit pissed off. I mean, you learn as like a minor political commentator with a few thousand followers on Twitter, don't tweet when you're angry. And if you are, someone who was previously, just a day ago, one of the highest powered people in the government, and you want a future in politics, you should have learned by now, don't tweet early in the morning when you're angry.
He was the bright young thing, the great hope of the Labour right.
Of Starmerism in particular.
More
yeah.
than Streeting in a way, because obviously now Streeting's that little bit older, and he has a huge public profile. But Darren Jones, I've spoken to lots of people in business or in digital industries. They really rated him. They're like, wow, this guy's really a competent bureaucrat. They could see him as a future chancellor. And what he's shown here is, actually, I don't have a modicum of self-control when it comes to, saying what I think, controlling my impulses. Kind of important if you want to...
Put it in the group chat.
Put it in the
Don't
group chat.
tweet it, the sort of miserable Starmerite reject group chat.
Yeah, exactly. Or, the amount of times I've written an email to somebody and then I just don't send it.
Yeah.
Because I'm so angry. As you get older, you sort of learn to do these things, don't you? Alongside a small reduction to electricity bills this year, not a game changer, but also not bad to announce on your first day on the job. The new government is also set to reintroduce the £2 cap on bus fares. That's likely to be alongside business rate cuts to hospitality businesses, bars, restaurants, cafes. Kevin Schofield, writing in the Huffington Post, has the story. Andy Burnham will announce plans to slash business rates for the hospitality sector by 20% within days, HuffPost UK can reveal. The new Prime Minister has already announced that VAT is to be removed from electricity bills to help households struggling with the cost of living. A £2 cap on bus fares is also set to be unveiled, possibly as soon as tomorrow, as Burnham begins his time in office with a policy blitz. During the Makefield by-election campaign last month, Burnham said he wanted to cut business rates for pubs, clubs and music venues by 20%. He also vowed to raise the threshold at which independent hospitality, leisure and retail companies start to pay the charge, thereby slashing their bills. Burnham said the policy would be funded by increasing the rates on large out-of-town warehouses used by the likes of Amazon. He said, our high streets matter to me because they matter to the people who live here. It's Burnhamese, but also, by the way, it's very popular. Sorry to tell you. I want to make sure that these family-owned businesses, as the heart and soul of this country, are protected and given the chance to thrive. A source close to Burnham said they would, quote, not get ahead of the announcement, which is to say they're not going to confirm it, but it's kind of happening. While all of this was happening, promises to reduce energy bills and help small businesses and make public transport cheaper, Nigel Farage also had something to say. This was his response at midday.
Andy Burnham has no mandate. No mandate whatsoever to bring about the biggest change for 40 years in British politics, and downstream from that, the biggest change in this country in 40 years. The Conservatives don't want an election. Funny that. The Liberal Democrats don't want an election. Funny that. The British people clearly, in opinion polls, by a large majority, do want a new general election, especially if there's a Prime Minister who comes in with no mandate and wants to make fundamental change.
It's kind of like a fake Downing Street, right? Where was that? I know, look, we're the journalists. We're meant to know. We're meant to be telling you. That should be in the copy.
It's not an important piece of information, precisely which door he was standing in front of.
But
I
it's
think we
a
can allow
black,
ourselves
so
that.
it looks like a Georgian building. And I know what you're saying, but it's kind of this LARPing as a party of government, because they're not even the official opposition, right? And this isn't just today. It's also when they're announcing, Robert Jenrick as the shadow chancellor. Your party has, whatever, 7, 8 MPs you can fit in a London cab. This is a bit OTT.
Well, one of the houses near Buckingham Palace was the one that was owned by the guy who was convicted of fraud in the United States. So presumably it's not that one.
You'd imagine not.
Or I suppose it's so zoomed in. If you zoom out, that's when you realise, oh, it's that fraudster's house.
Or it could be a green screen. No, I'm joking. They're beyond that now. They do have serious resources and backers behind them. What did you think of the package of reforms I mentioned at the top of this? Burnham's kind of rhetoric around it. So just to remind people, cuts to electricity, VAT to zero, £2 bus fare cap, and help for business rates for hospitality businesses. What do you think of those policies? Burnham's kind of communicative, sorry, I'm not on top form today. Communicative strategy, strategic comms, and then Farage's response seemed a bit strange.
Well, so I think in terms of Burnham's policies, in a way they're holding positions, right? If his analysis is that Britain has sort of big structural problems, then none of these are solving those. But I suppose that's fine. He wants some nice announcements that aren't that expensive that he can put out in the first couple of days to try and spread some good vibes. I mean, the energy bills one, it's taking 45 quid off bills. Ofgem sort of set to raise the cap by 90 quid in September anyway, because of the Strait of Hormuz. So that's all going to get eaten up and people's bills are still going to rise. So whether or not they credit him with that in the future, I don't know, it's unclear if that will happen. But, I mean, it's not that costly, and he can sort of suggest, I care about the cost of living. This, to me, it's lots of quite cheap things that aren't going to be transformative, but are trying to spread the good vibes. I mean, the £2 bus fares might be transformative for some people in some parts of the country. But yeah, this is all quite small fry, but that's fine because he's only been there for 24 hours. And sort of having some nice popular policies to announce in your first 24 hours to set out your agenda in terms of what you care about, I think is perfectly reasonable. And I think, they're 3 decent things to choose, aren't they? To sort of say to the country, I care about energy bills and I'm going to try and do something about them. I care about the high street and I'm going to try and do something to save it. I don't really like Amazon warehouses, so I'll tax them instead. Like it all makes sense. But obviously the big difficult decisions are very much yet to come.
Yeah, there's 2 aspects to it, I think. So on the one hand, I think he's trying to get a hearing from the public, right? Because ultimately he's won a by-election in Makefield. He hasn't won a general election. So I think he's trying to buy a hearing. But I also think it adds up, doesn't it? So yeah, of course, £42 isn't going to make a world of difference. But if there are 5 or 6 policies like that, and all of a sudden government can say before Christmas, actually, we're saving you £250 a year, compared to where, the OBR and the Treasury and the ONS thought we were going to be by now, 6 months ago. I mean, that's something. So I think the hearing is part of it, but also I do think that it's a flare, right? This is who I am. It's a flare going into the sky, especially the £2 bus fare. Remember, we had a £2 bus fare cap. They got rid of it, Reeves and Starmer on entering office. I think within about 6 weeks of coming into government, they got rid of it. Burnham kept it in Manchester to £2. I think it's an important sort of signal to people saying, look, I care about you. I care about hospitality. I care about the high street. I care about people that use public transport, particularly the elderly. Not particularly inclined to vote for Labour right now, important to say. I wonder where else they'll pitch this. And I don't think it'll stop. I think we're going to get 1 or 2 of these announcements every day, maybe for a week. Very smart, because you're just owning the political space. And here's a really interesting point. Obviously, Farage has responded to this, and I'm going to go back to you on that. But it does make me wonder, they've just been making smart political moves for 2 years, more or less, reform. And as Andy Burnham enters number 10, basically unopposed, where reform? Well, they're contesting a by-election against a bin in Clacton. It does seem like a bit of a howler, and a completely unforced one at that.
I mean, they're going to regret that.
When it comes to political decisions.
Because ultimately, I can understand why they're not really on the front foot attacking Andy Burnham, because at the moment, people want to give him a hearing, and he is going to have to make some difficult decisions at some point down the line, right? I mean, there are many things he's sort of hinted that he wants to do that would be incredibly expensive. He said he wants a social care service along the lines of the NHS, which I've read could be £18 billion a year, which makes total sense. I mean, that's going to be very expensive. Like, if you're going to try and raise £18 billion a year for that, you're going to have to make a decision that a bunch of people really aren't going to like. So there are going to be big opportunities to attack Andy Burnham down the line for Nigel Farage. I can see why you'd want to keep your powder dry, but you're absolutely right. The contest against the bin is a massive unforced error, because what you want to do is just sort of take a step back, make the odd intervention where it feels appropriate, but kind of seem above it all. And he now has to make an absolute fool of himself while Andy Burnham is in, his honeymoon period.
And also for people who aren't necessarily aware of this, there's somebody with a comment saying he's not a bin, he has a bin for a face. Pay him some respect. You're quite right. This by-election, I think, has about 30 people running in it, if I'm not mistaken.
There's only 2 real candidates.
Yeah. It's a choice between
The
Nigel
bin
Farage
face and the Monster Ray ballooning party.
Oh, right. You got me. But I was going to say this, which is inside baseball for people who aren't necessarily familiar with how we regulate the coverage of by-elections in this country. If you mention a single candidate on broadcast, you say Nigel Farage is contesting the by-election in Clacton. Let's say you say that on BBC, breakfast. Then the host has to list every single candidate and the party they're running for. What does that mean? Okay, you're going to lose 5 minutes of a show just saying names. It means that people are going to talk about the by-election. So it's just going to be very much a non-topic of conversation, unless Count Binface looks like he's going to win. And Reform have just lost a ton of momentum, a ton of time. And Labour aren't exposed right now. I think this is always going to be a good moment for Burnham, but they're not even at the races. They're saying we want to run the country, but they're not even visible in terms of the national political debate when there's a new prime minister.
And then they get back into Parliament, and there could then be another by-election called because the investigation continues the moment he re-enters Parliament. So like that, this part is not even the worst part.
No.
Like going up against Count Binface, very, very embarrassing. But if he has to fight a second by-election after that, I mean, I suppose that's the one where he can say, you know, it's me against the establishment,
Yeah.
because there'll be some real political parties standing against him. And he still might win, actually. So I suppose maybe that would be his redemption point. But this was an unforced error.
This was very daft. And I think he's going to win by a big margin, but on a really low vote. It's going to be a very, very strange by-election. Before we go to the next story, I want to talk about John Healey. He was a surprise appointment to many as the Chancellor, former Defence Secretary, who was at the Treasury 20 years ago, but hardly a big name in British politics. Now, when we spoke last week regarding speculation that Shabana Mahmood might get that job instead, Michael, it turns out, not for the first time, made a very prescient comment. He said that the real authors of economic policy within the Burnham project are Andrew Haldane, formerly a chief economist at the Bank of England, and Jim O'Neill, at one time the chairman of asset management at Goldman Sachs. Now, given the appointment of Healey to number 11, which, like I say, nobody expected, did Michael Walker call it right? Michael, is John Healey just a front man, an empty suit, a political vessel for the people I just mentioned, the likes of Andrew Haldane and Jim O'Neill?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like Jim O'Neill is the closer to Andy Burnham than Andy Haldane. I would imagine, you know, he's from Manchester and they just talk about each other in a very warm way. Potentially, I mean, the thing with Jim O'Neill is he wants Andy Burnham to do some things that would be really unpopular. So he's sort of said, what the next government has to do is they have to straight away get rid of the triple lock, straight away commit to cutting the welfare bill, and straight away radically transform the tax system so that we tax land and or property more fairly. Now, all three of those are going to have some real big losers. So, you know, I was on Jeremy Vine this morning with the former education secretary, Gillian Keegan, and we were talking about this, and she was saying, I don't think Jim O'Neill necessarily wants to be a part of this, because he's going to have all these positions, which is sort of like the economist positions, and Andy Burnham's going to be like, that all sounds a bit difficult, Jim. But yeah, no, I think it is quite possible that these guys will be in the background. I thought maybe Jim O'Neill would have been appointed to a Treasury or number 10 position by now, and he hasn't been. But I suppose the junior ministers actually haven't been appointed yet. And I mean, I think it's very much clear that John Healey hasn't been appointed to that position because he has a particular vision for the economy. He definitely has been put there as a compromise candidate who's considered a safe pair of hands. And if you wanted to not have Ed Miliband, it is smart in a way to put John Healey there, because it did look ridiculous to block Ed Miliband and put Shabana Mahmood in, who's literally never said anything about the economy.
And he didn't want to be there, apparently.
And who didn't want to be there. Whereas with John Healey, you can say he also has Treasury experience along the same lines that Ed Miliband does. He's a sort of less dynamic, interesting figure. I think it's a mistake not to have put Ed Miliband in there. But yeah, I mean, we're going to see as time goes on who is pulling the strings, because it's not going to be Andy Burnham. He's not interested in economics. He doesn't really understand it. It's not going to be John Healey, because he doesn't have a vision for how the economy should look. So unless you've got someone pulling the strings, it's just going to be Rachel Reeves all over again. So we need someone to sort of fill that space. I mean, maybe it'll be Miatta Fanbulla, but I doubt that anyone on sort of the Labour centre is going to be allowing her to really shape the agenda. You've got to remember his chief of staff is James Pennell, like who's a proper Blairite. So whoever does come in to say, I am going to be the economic powerhouse that directs the policy of this government, it will be someone like Jim O'Neill, someone who's establishment, who wants growth in the north, and who isn't going to rock the boat too much, but hopefully has, you know, a little bit more vision than Rachel Reeves did.
Yeah, I think Jim O'Neill on some stuff is going to be pretty good, right? Apprenticeships, supply side reform in terms of getting energy costs down, getting infrastructure costs down, the kind of abundance agenda you see from Ezra Klein across the Atlantic. I think that's partly a social democratic project. It can be, like, you know, Anglo-Dengism. I don't think in Jim O'Neill's world it is, but you can certainly see how it could conjoin to a project of social justice. Jim O'Neill, of course, is a Lord, hence why you're saying, you know, you're surprised he wasn't actually included in the cabinet. He could be in the cabinet. You know, Peter Mandelson was the second most powerful person in Gordon Brown's cabinet. He wasn't an MP, he was in the House of Lords.
And Jim O'Neill was in David Cameron's government.
Yeah.
He was a junior minister in the Treasury there, who was sort of had responsibility for, I think, sort of devolution and some of that. So that's his
Northern
sort of
Powerhouse and all
hinterland.
that stuff. And he was a Tory Lord, and now, of course, he's a crossbench peer, I think, which, again, not necessarily a bad thing if you're wanting to look like a consensus politician. Really interesting times. I do think that something will have to give.
Because it's John Healey and is it Emma Reynolds? I mean, it's who's the chief secretary or
She's the
financial
only
secretary.
person in the Treasury alongside him. And of course, Pat McFadden is still at pension.
Yeah, these just aren't...
Pensions and welfare.
These are... Do you remember when Keir Starmer came into power? And I can't remember if it was him or Rachel Reeves, where they were sort of asked, you've said change. What is the change actually going to be? And they said stability is change. And obviously...
Trying to be clever, but
stability
also
isn't
you sound
change.
ridiculous.
It sounded ridiculous, and also it didn't work. And I do feel that as of yet, we still haven't seen anything beyond like safe stability, pair of hands, people. Safe pair of hands, looking for stability. And that isn't going to cut it at this point in time.
It feels like, yeah, cost of living. Let's do some things, which you should do some things, and devolution, which is great. That's a start, but it's not a political project. The ownership of water has become a totemic issue in British politics in recent years. And Andy Burnham, who argues for more public control of the sector, has a big decision to make. The UK's biggest water company is set to go bust by October, and the government has to work out what to do about it. One option is to nationalise Thames Water. And in June, Burnham told The Guardian that this was his favourite option. Public ownership is absolutely an option, I would say, for Thames Water. That is what should be done. Seems pretty clear, but in the short term at least, it could also be pretty costly. Thames Water is in £20 billion worth of debt, and if the government takes it over, there'll be legal challenges from creditors about whether the Treasury should pay that back. Another option is to put Thames Water into a special administration regime. That is a form of temporary public control, which the Times reported on the weekend as being Burnham's most preferred option in the here and now. This would involve a government-appointed administrator running the company for a short period of time until a buyer could be found. The state would have to pay the running costs, and the £16 billion in debt would be frozen. Then, after a period of time, the company would be sold off again. Whatever the price it sells for, that would repay the money spent by the government during its temporary administration, and the rest would be distributed to creditors. But this means the current creditors losing control and then ultimately losing a lot of their money. The creditors, mainly American investment companies, don't want that to happen, and instead have proposed their own plan. They want to take over the company themselves, write down 30% of its debt, then add some of their own capital, but on the proviso that Ofwat, the water regulator, relaxes their targets so they can avoid any fines. And if that doesn't sound complicated enough, over the weekend they added a new proviso to try and soften up Andy Burnham to help them take the company over. They've said that if Burnham approves their plan, they will give the UK government a golden share in Thames Water. All sounds very Trumpian. This could give the government a veto of key decisions, including whether the company could be sold. And today they've suggested a further compromise. According to The Telegraph, they say if they're allowed to take over the company, they will give the London mayor a position on a supervisory board. So a golden share with the government and the London mayor being consulted. Consultation often is, as I like to say on the show, a fugazi. It's often a kind of fake political trade-off. You're not really giving anything to anybody. You can consult, which basically means you can talk, we'll pretend to listen, and then we'll do what we want to do anyway. What should Burnham do? This is a really complicated problem.
I mean, it's incredibly complicated because the whole structure here is incredibly complicated. And it took me a long time to get my head around it, sort of researching it today. But I think I've understood it. And what he should do is put it into special administration and then work out over the next 2 years how he can not sell it to another sort of incompetent private equity conglomerate. And ideally find some kind of publicly controlled non-profit sort of municipal corporation who they can give it to. And I think what took me a while to sort of get my head around is the issue when it comes to... Actually, so let's start with the fact that it's privatized in the first place. So it's privatized in the first place, and that's a big mistake, right? This is a natural monopoly. There are good things about private ownership of the means of production, which tends to involve competition, innovation. Now, you can't have competition or innovation when it comes to water because it's pipes to people's homes, and you can't... I shop with Thames Water and I can't shop with anyone else. So it was ridiculous to sell it off in the first place. They partly did it for ideological purposes. I mean, they mainly did it for ideological purposes, but also because Britain was becoming subject to an EU directive in the late 80s, early 90s, which was going to require a lot of investment, and the Tories wanted to keep that off the balance books. Or keep that off the balances. So they wanted private companies to come in and provide that investment so that the Treasury didn't have to say, we're going into more debt. Have you heard that before? That's what the PFIs are about under New Labour as well. So an accounting trick which works in the short term, but works in the short term just in terms of making your accounts look a little bit better to the financial markets, but screws you in the long term. We're in that long-term period where we're screwed. It hasn't worked. This company has taken out 7 billion in dividends. That was more the previous owners, Macquarie, and they're now 16 billion pounds in debt. So we're in a stupid situation which we should never have been in. What do you do at this point in time if you're Andy Burnham? Now, the obvious thing to say is just nationalize it. Privatization hasn't worked. So let's just turn around and say, you've failed. We're nationalizing you. We're taking over the company. Now, the people who own Thames Water at this point in time wouldn't actually mind that. So the people who own it, they're a bunch of pension funds. They don't want it. They bought it for sort of 5 billion or whatever, and they've written that off. They've said, this is useless. We don't want anything to do with it. So we could buy it from them for very little right now. The issue is the creditors. So it is in debt by 16 billion pounds. And if we were to nationalize it tomorrow, then we would take on those debts. So the government would have 16 billion pounds extra on its debt pile. So that's why the more likely option is this special administrative regime. And what the special administrative regime means is that the government appoints an administrator. They sort of just run the companies, because obviously the water still needs to come out of our taps. Pipes still need to get fixed. So you have a sort of bureaucrat in charge of managing it. And the debts are all frozen. So they're not wiped off, but they're frozen. And then after about 2 years, the government sells it off again. And then the price that it is purchased for first goes off to pay the costs to the government, and then goes down and pays the other creditors according to seniority. So ultimately, sort of the most sort of obvious thing that you do if you don't want any transformation of power in the system is you just do that. You sell it for 10 billion to some other private company in 2 years' time, and the creditors sort of take about a 30% hit. Some of them get some money, some of them don't. But we'd just sort of be going over this again. What you actually want to do, I think, is put it into this special administrative regime. That means we don't take on the debts, and then find a way that we can sell it to someone who isn't a private corporation that's going to rinse it and milk it for all that it's worth. So ideally, you'd set up some kind of London water corporation and you'd sell it to them. Because interestingly, in the special administrative regime, you don't have to sell it to the highest bidder. So, you could sell it for potentially a low cost. Again, the problem here is that if you screw over, because obviously what I would want to do is screw over the creditors. They lent to this stupid ass company, screw them over, just sort of say, you're going to have to take this massive haircut. The reason that's going to be difficult for the government is because if they do that, then no one will lend to any of the other utilities. So then we'd have to nationalize everything, which is possible and probably a good idea, but that's an awful lot of political capital and government attention. And if he's desperate to bring sort of growth and benefits to cost of living in the next 2 to 3 years, then nationalizing the whole water industry and keeping the financial markets on side is going to be a lot to ask.
I mean, 16 billion would build lots of council homes.
Exactly.
You could remake the UK housing market across whole regions with 16 billion. It's a lot of money, shouldn't be sniffed at. You said the water shouldn't be privatized. I want to go over some numbers very quickly. Privatization is what, 1992?
Yep.
I think since then, these companies, which in 1992 didn't have a single penny of debt on their balance sheets, now they're cumulatively, I think, looking at about 80 to 90 billion pounds worth of debt. Similar figures in terms of dividends that are pulled out. So they're in the red by tens of billions. Tens of billions have been pulled up in terms of dividends. These were companies, like I say, without a single scintilla of debt. No investment's been made into them. We'll talk about that more in a moment. The paradigmatic example of all this, like I said, was Macquarie with Thames Water. Macquarie, who are they? These are asset managers. It's an Australian company. What do asset managers do with things like water? They generally have what are called closed funds. So they'll say, we have a closed fund with regards to this industry, housing or water or whatever. Pile in, give us your money, often pension funds. We can give you great returns. It's a 10-year fund, so it has to close after 10 years, hence it's called a closed fund, not an open fund. 10 billion, and we're going to spend it on this or that asset. In the case of Thames Water, they buy low, they underinvest, they cut costs, they raise prices, and they sell it for more, okay? So you buy cheap, you sell high. Sounds great, of course, unless you're the customers. Your bills go up for an inferior service. And of course, the organisation, in this case, Thames Water, is lumbered with a ton of debt. The workers are treated like crap. You also see it with the Royal Mail. Similar thing, right? Prices go up, underinvest, workers are squeezed, customers are screwed. Same theme repeatedly. The question is, what do you do about it? What's the best thing to do here? I should say 16 billion sounds like a lot, and it is, of course, but Thames Water is huge. Thames Water has about 16 million customers. I think 1 in 4 people in England and Wales use Thames Water. So there is a conversation there about, well, if the government has to bail out the company with billions, it's probably worth it. I think 16 billion is probably too much. And I think what you're saying about the special investment company or special investment...
A special administration regime.
Special... God, I love it. It sounds so dengist.
Yeah.
I love it.
And then you said, a bunch of people in the comments are saying, Michael's saying, do all of this and then just sell it back to the private sector. I'm saying, do all of this and then find some kind of organization to sell it to that is municipally controlled.
Yeah. That's owned by...
the City of London or something.
Well, not the City of London, Michael.
Not the City of London, sorry, the
Mayor of London's office.
Yeah.
Michael is trying to save you folks £16 billion and you're hating on him. 16 billion can do a lot. No, seriously. 16 billion can build a lot of social housing. We could scrap tuition fees and student loans for nurses for a long time with 16 billion. The ownership structure of Thames Water might be bloody confusing, but this is something their customers will understand. Thames Water has just announced a hosepipe ban for 10 million people, so about 2/3 of their customers. The water company said its region had seen 40% of the average rainfall that it might expect, more days at or above 34 degrees C this year than ever previously recorded. Maybe climate change is actually a thing. That's something they aren't lying about, and which they obviously can't control. Something we might blame them for, though, is this. Not a single new reservoir has been built since 1992, the same year water was privatised. And the body that represents the water industry has warned there's another problem coming down the line. Water UK, which represents the industry, says the government's AI strategy has failed to take into account the stress that data centres pose to the water supply. The answer there might seem fairly simple. Just build fewer data centres until we have sufficient water supply. This is more worrying, however. Water UK has also said that a shortage of water will get in the way of the government's plans to build 1 million new homes. Michael, what do we do about water? I mean, you've already outlined your very contentious plan for the future of Thames Water, but climate change means more problems. We've underinvested for a really long time. Bills are going to have to go up regardless, right? I think this is something that people don't understand. If we brought the entirety of the water industry into public ownership, we start to build the infrastructure like more reservoirs that we have to build, bills are going to go up a lot. And the government's going to be on the hook for that. By the way, I think they should go up because we need to rebuild really critical infrastructure for the public good. A lot of swing voters aren't going to like it, though. They think, well, if you bring that into public ownership, it means that we're not going to have hikes to our bills. Well, you will. It's just the hikes won't be going to shareholders. It'll be going to actually building stuff.
Well, the argument for privatisation was always to say, if it is in state control, then the government is always going to be inclined to sort of win votes to keep prices low and to not invest because that's always the next government's problem. And also, if you've got competition between investing in water and investing in healthcare, they're always going to choose healthcare. So the idea was you take it off sort of direct provision from the government, and that will encourage lots of investment because this private company doesn't have to compete with the NHS, and they're going to be willing to raise prices because they're not looking for votes. Obviously, they're going to be regulated, so they're not going to be able to raise prices as high as they want, but they're going to be able to make those long-term decisions. That was the theory. Now, in practice, we haven't had a reservoir built since 1992. So clearly something didn't work. But there does have to be an argument made to say we need to make serious long-term investments into the economy in all sorts of ways. Reservoirs. I mean, there is a super sewer being built under London. That seems to be like the one good thing that's happening in the water industry at the moment. But obviously, they did that with a bunch of debt. Now they're going bust. So yes, we need much more water. I mean, I know lots of people's response would just be saying, well, it's all the data centers. Now, I think one data center takes up about as much water as a golf course. So it's not nothing, but it's also not everything. Most water is actually used by agriculture. You don't want to build the data center near a very heavily populated area or somewhere that's already got water strain, but you probably can build them somewhere. But the issue is infrastructure and investing in infrastructure. And the big issue is, I suppose, again, partly, obviously, Thatcher wasn't reluctant to privatize anything. So it wasn't that they were forced into it. But Labour and this particular government, it is this argument that they don't want anything on the Treasury's books. And then in the long term, it just screws you, right? It was the same with PFI. We don't want the new hospitals on the books, so we'll get a private company to build it and then we'll rent it back from the private company. Can we please think in a 30 to 40 year timeline?
Yeah.
And then maybe we'd have some reservoirs and we'd be able to build the homes.
Great societies are built by people who plant trees and their ancestors, or the descendants rather, can sit in the shade. Lovely, lovely phrase.
Beautiful.
This is neoliberalism, right? Neoliberalism, and you get people like John Rentoul at The Independent saying, what is neoliberalism? There are literally tens of thousands of Google Scholar, cited articles that you can find about neoliberalism. David Harvey, one of the most cited social scientists in the world today, literally wrote a book about it, but I'm sure that probably doesn't count for John Rentoul. What is neoliberalism? It's a war against the future, right? That's what it does. It systematically discounts the future for the here and now. And a classic example of it is with something like privatization of water, privatization of rail, or even right to buy. I did a downstream recently on right to buy with Peter Apps, housing journalist. And the more you learn about right to buy, the more you understand. It was in terms of net utility maximization in a certain moment in the mid-1980s, you could actually make an argument for it, right? But the point is today, many of the places where you saw the social housing being sold, many of those places now, more than 50% of that social housing is in the private rental sector. And it's had hugely damaging effects. So what you've done is basically declare war on the future. What you've done is sell off all of this housing stock. And by the way, the money wasn't even going back to local authorities. They've lost a revenue stream. They were making money from social rents. Not much. That was a revenue stream for them. They lose the revenue stream. The proceeds of the sales go to the Treasury to massage deficits. And of course, Thatcherites on the right love to talk about fiscal prudence. Thatcher ran deficits every year, even whilst selling stuff, while privatizing stuff, even while screwing local authorities. She was doing all of these accounting tricks and they were still running deficits. So it was never a tenable political economy or way to run the country. Much of the right still can't accept that. And core to it, like I say, is this: declaring war on the future. And basically, the crap and the garbage from the 80s and the 90s is having to be resolved in the 2020s and really the 2030s. I saw Tom Harwood say, Andy Burnham has basically concluded we've failed for 40 years. I wasn't born in a country that was failing. Actually, until I was a teenager, it felt like Britain was quite a successful country. But that's quite a fair assessment. I would respond, I don't know what you think about this, Michael, that the post-2008 malaise we're stuck in, the dysfunctions of much of our welfare system, the spiraling housing benefit bill, for instance, these were a necessary and inevitable consequence of the kinds of decisions that Tom cheers on.
Thatcherism was a sugar high, right? A sugar high for the economy.
High.
Because you sell off everything, that does create some income in the short term, but you've sold off the family silver. And also you deregulate finance, which means that house prices go up, which, for one generation makes everyone really rich because their house is expensive, but then the next generation can't afford any houses. So then you feel very poor. So it's a sugar rush. I think this also relates to, and especially with water, like how irrational and crazy it all seems, to an argument I come back to a lot. Your conversation with Dan Wang was all about this. So he's got this book where he talks about China being a nation of engineers and America being a nation of lawyers. Now, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson in their book, Abundance, I really like both of them. I think they're both really smart, open-minded, clever people. But they mainly put down America being a nation of lawyers, almost down to the left and liberals, because they say environmental protection became a big priority, which was good, but it's gone too far. And ultimately, we need to let both the state and businesses build more stuff with less restrictions. I think a big part of that is also neoliberalism, because it used to be that the state would do it. So if we just had a department that was expert in building sewers and building reservoirs, and it was filled with engineers, and then a few people who had financial expertise, and then, it would need some external accountability, I'm sure, but then they could do this quite simple thing, which is build reservoirs, build sewers, and decide on what price you're going to charge people. right? Maybe you make it arm's length so that it's not competing with the NHS. There are a bunch of things you can do, which, by the way, is what happens in most of the world. No one else privatizes water. Maybe it should be municipal. Lots of arguments to be made there. But that would be a system which is led by engineers. Instead, neoliberalism, what it gives you is a system which is necessarily led by lawyers and financial engineers, because all the state does, the state's power is to sign legal contracts with different people to try not get screwed over. So it's you sign this legal contract to say you will provide water at this price. Oh, and then, by the way, if you go bust, then we'll have this special administrative regime. And it's all about liability. If this goes wrong, who's liable? Whereas in China or in France, right, you've got an agency which says, okay, we have a problem. We want to get water to everyone's houses. How do we solve it? Let's do that. I think that's the better way of running this kind of thing.
And do you have a message for Tom Harwood, Michael?
Well, Tom Harwood said the reason Thames Water went bust is because Ofgem set their prices. He said, well, if they were able to set their own prices, then maybe they wouldn't have gone bust. So I replied to him on there, like, do you seriously think that water companies, like the original natural monopoly, should be able to set whatever price they wanted when the consumers have no choice but to get that water, right? It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, Robert Nozick, who's like the libertarian philosopher par excellence, makes these arguments, right? And the best example is there's the Wilt Chamberlain example in Nozick, but there's also the one about being in the desert and compulsion, right? So people like, don't mean to be horrible about Tom, most people that are sort of apologists for market capitalism, which is liberals, they say that wage labor, me selling my labor for a wage is a free act, right? I choose to do it, you choose to do it, it's a consensual act. And then, of course, the argument is made, well, if you were dying of thirst in the desert and somebody comes along with a bottle of water and they say you can drink it, but you have to pay £10,000 to drink it, wire that to my account with Monzo right now, or whatever, or give me that ring or watch that's worth all that money. Is that a consensual, fair exchange? And I thought that was just a metaphor, but it turns out that's how Tom wants to run water policy in this country. Please, I'm dying. I need water. I'm parched. Thames Water, sorry. A glass of water is going to cost you 20 quid. It's the fair market price if we want to improve our infrastructure. And by the way, they don't even know the condition of between 20 and 30% of their estate. This is the crazy thing with Thames Water. Imagine you have a house and you say to the builder, I want my house completely redone. I want the plaster done. I want the electrics, the water. I want the roof sorted. Okay, so how many rooms have you got? Don't know. Don't know. What do you don't know? Well, I've only been to about 2/3 of the house. Maybe there's another floor. I don't know. How many bathrooms you got? Don't know. Maybe there's an ensuite at the top. This is crazy. How can you even put a price on the amount of investment that's needed in Thames Water when they don't know about a third of the estate's condition? Remarkable. That's got nothing to do with Ofwat. Zero. It's because these people are crooks. This is institutionalized corruption, especially under Macquarie and then afterwards. Am I allowed to say that? Maybe.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. We'll cut it afterwards.
The other thing is they literally own the pipes in perpetuity. So, like, obviously, privatizing the railways didn't work very well. And actually, we did sell off the rail track. It ended up coming back into public ownership. By the way, then that was because they went bust, but the government did take on the debt for that. So there's sort of some precedent there. But as it works now, is we tender out sort of the function of running the railways for sort of 7 years at a time. But the fundamental infrastructure is still owned by us, which gives us the power, right? We can say, okay, well, and this is what the Labour government are doing now. When your contract comes to an end, we're going to take it in-house. The reason water is complicated and there's all these legal wranglings is because they legally own the pipes. And so the debtors, obviously, when a corporation normally goes into administration, all of its assets get sold off and get given to the creditors. But in this situation, what do? Do you say, okay, well, we'll sell off all the pipes and give that to the creditors and then we won't have water? You can't sell off infrastructure that fundamental to private corporations because the profit motive, like the disciplining effect of the market, cannot work with the pipes that we all use to stay alive.
David Harvey, the world's most famous living Marxist, I think it's fair to say.
Yep.
He has a great perspective on this. He says, look, I'm not really a big fan of the market system. But if you want to sell things in a market and make money and be competing against people, he said, why would you want to be in natural monopolies? They're so unsexy. They're so boring. The margins are so low. There aren't big margins in water. There aren't big margins in rail. There aren't. Go into t-shirts, go into cars, go into laptops, go into making mugs. You can, of course, get your Novara Media mug here, No Future Utopia now at the Novara Media shop. Go into, by the way, these aren't particularly expensive. They're very good. The t-shirts as well, very good. Very good supply chains. Organized, unionized labor, cotton.
The margins, they're tiny.
The margins are tiny. We're terrible capitalists, but you get my point, right? So look, if you want to be in love with capitalism and make a ton of money, knock yourself out, stay away from water and trains and public utilities. Nobody is benefiting from this more broadly as a society. Of course, some people are the shareholders. Crazy, so self-destructive. Political cannibalism. This is society eating itself. Let's quickly go to one of your comments before we go to our final story. I can feel my mouth getting very dry. I'll have a glass of water in a second. We have £10 from @BazCams451. Confiscation won't cost anything. I don't think that's technically true. As Michael said, there are costs. If we were to confiscate without giving them some kind of return, then of course that diminishes the incentives for other people to extend lines of credit to other water companies or other utilities. There would be some costs. Okay, so what are the costs we're willing to swallow as the British public? And by the way, most people want to see water in public ownership. The message from Sunday's World Cup final, presided over by Donald Trump, was simple. Love. L-O-V-E. That was the word plastered across the pitch in the schmaltzy halftime show put together by Chris Martin. But within 24 hours, there was no love lost between two of the tournament's co-hosts. On Monday, Trump slapped 50% tariffs on a swathe of Canadian goods. Consumer items like wine and hockey sticks and industrial goods such as cement are among the goods targeted. Trump says that this is in retaliation for what he called, quote, unequal treatment of US cars, dairy, and alcohol. But he also has another gripe with his neighbours to the north, wildfire smoke. On Saturday, he accused Canada's Mark Carney of poisoning America's air and said he would make Canada pay for the damage via extra tariffs. He was asked about that in a press conference today.
Increased tariffs on Canada yesterday. Can you say if you still expect to impose tariffs on the wildfire problem? And can you say when you might impose 301?
A lot of damage has been done. They're not managing their forests properly, and the wind has a tendency to blow right over New York City, right over, you saw Detroit, they had to close the whole place. Michigan was really affected. They had to close businesses for 4 days. It's very serious what they're doing, and they don't seem to be able to do anything about it. If they managed their forests, they wouldn't have the fires.
That had the potential to be a Trump all-timer. The wind has a tendency to blow. And then he carried on. I thought he was just going to say that. That would be fabulous. But Michael, it does indeed have a tendency to blow. What's going on here? I mean, it's not an accident that the day after the World Cup is finished that Trump is doing this, right?
I've got no idea. I mean, the wildfire stuff was before the World Cup. So I think maybe that was on Saturday.
So that's what I'm saying, he's waiting, right? Or no?
Well, no, I mean, the wildfire tweets were before the end of the World Cup. The 50% tariffs are after the World Cup. Yeah, so maybe he did wait until after the World Cup for the 50% tariffs. But the wildfire stuff is crazy. Because I think about geoengineering quite a lot. You know, I'm still on the fence about it, but I think we're probably going to do it at some point. I mean, climate change is
such a broad term, by the way. People get upset. Geoengineering can mean painting the top of a city white.
No, but I think it's going to happen in one of the more extreme
crazy ways.
One of the more crazy ways, right?
Right.
Trying to change the weather.
A lens between the planet and the sun.
The two ways that are the extreme ways, but which probably would work to some degree, but would have consequences, are you put some sort of reflectant in the stratosphere. Sulfur dioxide is the classic one.
By gas, right?
But so particulates.
Yeah.
So it's particulates. So it'd be like sulfur dioxide, soot, that kind of thing. That would go in the stratosphere, right?
My plan to address climate change: smog.
Smog. Well, it's from historically, it's from volcanoes. So when the volcano erupts and it's big and it goes up super high, then in the past that has brought down global temperatures by a degree for a year. So if you just do that over and over again with planes in the stratosphere, you could have some effect.
Wouldn't lots of crops die as well, though?
Well, so this is where it's problematic because you don't know what the effect is going to be on the weather system. Now, the argument against that is we don't know what's going to happen to the weather system with climate change anyway. But anyway, there are going to be lots of consequences. And one of the big arguments against it is what country does it? And if that affects the weather in another country, how can this be resolved in a peaceful way, which isn't completely inequitable. This is what I talked about with Naomi Klein in that interview. And she was saying, because I was saying, the only really positive outcome I can see is sort of, we get our emissions down, but in the meantime, we're going to have to do some sort of geoengineering. I don't know if it's going to be marine cloud brightening, which is where you just sprinkle a bit of water on top of the clouds so they're a bit whiter, so they reflect a bit of sun, or this stratospheric aerosol injection. So the best case scenario, say, is we bring down emissions because ultimately we're already so far through the green transition that it's cheaper to get to, or cheaper to have electrification anyway, with cars, solar, renewables. But we do that in the meantime. And she said, which I think is a good point, we have a responsibility not to imagine the best case scenario. We have a responsibility to imagine the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And who is going to be managing these geoengineering projects? It's not going to be these super rational bureaucrats that you like to imagine running the world. It's going to be people like Donald Trump. And someone like Donald Trump, literally, he's trying to tariff Canada because they have a wildfire. You know, it doesn't give you much faith that we're going to have a political system which is capable of dealing with planetary level geoengineering.
But going back to my question about what is geoengineering. So, for instance, some people argue for, and this would be hugely demanding in terms of energy, but basically shooting water back onto the Arctic ice to stop it melting. I mean, that's technically geoengineering, right?
Yeah.
And this would be done via, renewable energy. So I guess a combination maybe of hydrothermal, because of course you're near volcanoes in the Arctic, and maybe some solar as well, geothermal rather. That's people.
Well,
people hear geoengineering and they start to get really concerned. But it's the crazy, it's the relatively mundane.
Well, I talked to Sir David King, and so the idea with sort of pumping water, you dig holes in the ice, which encourages more water to come to the surface. And when the water comes to the surface, it freezes.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that will thicken the ice in the Arctic. I asked Sir David King about that when he was on the show. So he's the former chief scientific advisor. He's interested in the idea, but he said that salty water often tends to melt stuff. So he wasn't sure about that. It's often fresh water that's sort of.
But another one is basically you just pump water that's surrounding the ice caps back onto the top of the ice.
Yeah, but that's what he's saying. But then he's worried that the salt will cause it to melt.
You wouldn't be digging down. This is pumping stuff that's already water outside of the.
Yeah, but it's the sea. You're pumping the seawater onto the ice, either by drilling holes in the ice or doing it from the outside. But
obviously, the drilling is, people might be a bit concerned.
But the drilling isn't the problem. The problem is getting the salt water on the top of it. Does that actually have unintended consequences? So the two ones that are talked about most is stratospheric aerosol injection, where you're putting some form of particulate in the stratosphere, like these volcanic eruptions, or marine cloud brightening, where you are making clouds brighter so they reflect more sun.
And what about Peter Thiel's one? This is like a cosmic parasol.
Does he want the cosmic parasol mirror thing?
Yeah, where they say, well, look, we just need to basically cut out 2% of the sun's light that hits.
Well, that's what stratospheric aerosol injection would be doing.
Yeah, same principle. But what about Peter Thiel's crazy idea?
I'm not sure what his mirror idea is. I'm not
a cosmic parasol.
I'll need to. But I think
it's kind of like a giant lampshade in space. It's just obscuring a small percentage of the sun's energy hitting the planet.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know what his particular proposal is, but that's exactly the same sort of physics as stratospheric aerosol injection, which is to stop 2% of the sun's heat getting to the earth.
Michael Walker in the chat is really polarizing lots of people today. Good. It's good. It's good to be. It's not looking good, Brev. Somebody said. Well, it's good to hear these arguments. Michael, I'm so happy you've been on the show tonight and you've been so erudite because I don't know why. Maybe I'm coming down with something. Maybe it is too hot.
It is too hot, Aaron.
We turned off the fans and the aircon and my brain stopped working. Michael said this. He said your brain is better when you're cold.
I said this is the right temperature for watching a movie. It's not the right temperature to have interesting thoughts.
Maybe you were right. I feel like I'm regressing to my lizard brain. We didn't talk yesterday because, of course, you were hosting the show. I wasn't on it. What did you think of the World Cup final?
The right team won.
You're a big Spain guy, right? You love Spain.
I love Spain, but also, I would have loved England. I would have preferred England to win the World Cup. But, Argentina, it was outrageous. I think they played disgustingly. The end, when the guy is celebrating winning the World Cup final and he gets punched in the face, it's crazy. I don't know what is wrong with that. That it was very controversial that the England manager in 1966 said the Argentina players were animals.
Alf Ramsey, yeah.
Yeah. There'll be many people in the world saying that after watching that World Cup. Problematic, but
you're saying about a group of players, not a whole country. I think that's very important.
I loved seeing Enzo Fernandez getting sent off. He deserved it. But it wasn't the best. It wasn't the best World Cup final.
Such a shame.
England versus Spain would have been much more entertaining.
Such a shame. Because I obviously wanted England to win the semi-final, but there was a part of me seeing Argentina, who I think are, outside of Messi, a very limited team, the way they came together to play for each other in their country. I really admire that, actually. I think it's a really great thing.
They do sing the national anthem with gusto.
Oh, they really go for it, well, especially against England. And I thought there was something to that, but not good with the final. And I should say, Michael, for all the bashing that France and Spain get from the Yanks, I think average life expectancy in France, 83. Average life expectancy in Spain, 84. France, world-leading nuclear. Spain, world-leading solar. Higher productivity per hour than Japan or South Korea. Great food. Beautifully kept cities. Best high-speed systems in the world outside China. Europe gets a lot right.
Yeah, they're doing all right.
Stop the hate. Stop the hate. Thanks, Michael, for joining me tonight. I really needed it with the heat slowing me down. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.